achievements at Carolina. But I thought I'd start today by talking a bit about our university's efforts to address racial tensions and disparities on our campus. As you well know, this is a major concern across the country right now, and certainly here in Chapel Hill, we're no different. I was very happy that yesterday at our Board of Trustees meeting that our board approved a policy for removing names from buildings and spaces on campus, and this is a really important next step. I think you probably know that back in late May, early June, approved actually removed the moratorium of renaming buildings, which was put in place several years ago. And so I think we're moving in the right direction, and I'm grateful for the work of our Board of Trustees. Right now, we have already formed a committee. I formed this morning to review the recommendation that came forward to me earlier this week from our History, Race, and a Way Forward Commission. That recommendation was to remove the names of Aycock, Carr, Daniels, and Ruffin from 4 of our buildings. And so we'll be working with this group next week to provide a recommendation to me that then I'll move forward with the Board of Trustees. So, as the nation's first public university, I often say that we have a long history, that it is complicated and at times has excluded many North Carolinians, but we are committed to a campus community in which everyone can thrive and that they know that they belong here. And as Trustee Gene Davis said yesterday at our Board of Trustees meeting, we have to shine a light on the dark parts of our history. And so there's an awful lot to be proud of for this great university, almost 227 years old now, and it's a place that we all love, but we have to learn from our past and to grow from that. And so this is not an issue that we will forget about as the political attention shifts. This is an issue we're going to stay focused on, and our new roadmap, which is called Carolina Next Innovations for Public Good. It's our strategic plan that was adopted back in January, right before the pandemic really began, and we launched that new roadmap, or strategic plan, if you want to call it that. And the first strategic initiative in there is called Build Our Community Together. And there are 8 strategic initiatives, but it's that first one that I think is really most important, because once we have a community in which we all know we can trust one another, work together, a place where everybody knows they belong and can thrive, then we'll be able to carry out those other 7 strategic initiatives in a really important way. So I know that we must do more, and I'm pledging to make sure that this is a priority for our campus leadership. And I shared with them a quote that I just really liked, and it resonated with me from one of our alums, Lindsay Ray McIntyre, Chief Diversity Officer at Microsoft, who I met out in Seattle back in October. And she said that it's during times like this, for leaders to really reflect on the difference that they can make, and that it's most important that we create space to listen to members of each community and to understand what is needed in moments like this, and that we have to embrace the discomfort of not knowing, of not being certain, of not understanding, and then be motivated enough to learn and get better. And so that's what we're trying to do here at Carolina, and I'm committed to listening to our entire campus community. I was on a call the other day with Greer Webb, who I know spoke at a recent Rotary Club meeting. Greer's one of my favorite students here at Carolina, and was on a Zoom call with him earlier this week to discuss the students' goals for moving forward and some of the challenges with this coming semester. And so we have a lot of work to do, and we're committed to it. So I can't underestimate the impact that the coronavirus has had, COVID-19 has had on our campus. I thought I'd share a little bit about our plans. As you well know, that the positive cases across North Carolina is concerning, and it's not what we had hoped for or certainly expected at this time. But it's affecting not only the state, but certainly us here in Chapel Hill as we're trying to plan ahead for the fall. But Despite the challenges we face, our team at Carolina remains hopeful, and we're working tirelessly to try to ensure that we can reopen our campus safely. And as I've told people, we never really shut down, but we certainly are working toward a phased reopening of most of our operations. Most people have been working remotely over these past 5 months, but showing up every day at Carolina. I'm grateful to our infectious disease experts for their wisdom and guidance. They've done an incredible job. You've seen them on the news, the national news. You've seen them in the local news, but they're making a difference. And but we're listening closely to their direction as we consider what's safe for the fall. We have launched our fall 2020 roadmap probably about 8 or 9 weeks ago now, and it's been really led by 6 guiding principles. The first of those is that we aspire to be that leading global public research university that I know we will that will be, can be, but during times like this, great universities have to rise to the occasion, help society to really to think about that next whatever, that next pandemic, to lead and show society how to adapt. And to take on the next grand challenge of our time. But regardless of whether we're in person or remote, we'll accomplish that mission. We are obviously focused on the safety and well-being of the campus community, and that'll remain our top priority. But as I've already said, we're just really fortunate to be guided by these leading global public health and infectious disease experts we have here. We're going to have roadmap off-ramps that we're looking at as we think about the virus not responding in the way that we had hoped that it would. We're looking at trying to de-densify campus as much as possible and thinking about how people that do come back to work can work in shifts, if you will, so that we don't have a lot of people in one building at one time, or in-person classes, which right now we're planning for about 50% of those to be in person, 50% remote. And but those classrooms will look very different. We'll have no more than 50 students in a classroom, in most cases smaller numbers, 25 to 30. But we're preparing for whatever the virus will bring in terms of, we're preparing for a second wave, which is why we decided to start early and end early by Thanksgiving, so we wouldn't send everybody home and then come back from Thanksgiving to finish out those last 3 or 4 weeks. We won't be doing that. We'll be finished by November 24th, and we'll send everybody home and hope that we can focus on the spring semester at that point. But we're working on what will define these off-ramps, if you will, what would cause us to pivot. But we're looking at how the campus community will adhere to the community standards and the guidelines that we've put in place. And they're part of our roadmap that you can find if you're interested on our website. It's called carolinatogether.unc.edu. And so we're going to be monitoring how people are following those standards. We're going to look at the national, regional, and local trends in the virus, the prevalence of the virus. We'll look at the availability of rapid and accurate testing for contact tracing on our campus. We'll look at the continuity of critical functions on our campus and how the healthcare and hospital systems are able to manage positive cases should there be an outbreak. We're very fortunate here on campus to have a world-class healthcare system right at our back door. And as I've told people, there's probably not a 10-mile radius in the country that I'd rather be living in than the one that we live in right here in Chapel Hill with this world-class university and healthcare system. But we have to, be looking at this carefully and know that we may have to pivot and take an off-ramp at some point. But I will say that Mayor Pam Heminger has been wonderful to work with. I'm in regular discussions with her, particularly in terms of the economic consequences of decisions that are made for the town, and as well as the safety of our students in town, that the folks that are running the restaurants and bars and shops, we all are in this together and have to be sure we're protecting each other. But we know that this will not be a typical fall semester. We need to change our behavior on campus, adhere to these community standards of wearing masks. You may have seen the video that Coach Williams put out 2 weeks ago about the importance of mask wearing. You're going to be seeing a lot more of these public service announcements over the next few weeks. It's hand hygiene, it's social distance, properly distancing, and we're just going to have to really stay true to what we know can keep our community safe. So as I wrap up, there's no playbook for this, but we're working hard to implement a plan in a collaborative way, and we'll need your help, and look forward to hearing the questions and ideas that you might have today. So thank you, and I guess I'll turn it over now back to Will and Jim, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, Chancellor, thank you so much for getting us started with our conversation today. We are grateful for you being with us. I'd like to ask each of you who are in attendance now if you haven't, you can go ahead and pose a question to the Chancellor through the Zoom portal, through chat. Again, choose if possible, choose the questions member on chat. And now to Jim Jim Hebner for our first follow-up question.
Well, the top question, Chancellor, thanks for being with us today. The question that I probably hear more than anything else is that the university can set the format for what you do in classes and within programmed campus events. But when students go back to their dorms and they are not under the supervision of the campus, students are still students. They've always been of the age that they are today, which is having their own need for socialization. And the dorms, there's a widespread feeling that the dorms would be hotbeds as super spreaders. How do you plan to deal with that? How do you process that?
Sure, Jim, good question. That's certainly been part of the concern as we think about how to reopen campus operations. The residence halls are a challenge. We have hired many more housekeepers and janitorial services. We're using new disinfectants and things for the common areas on campus. That's going to be a major part of it, but it's really going to be about emphasizing the need to change behaviors. And so we're holding special orientations for students. We're also trying, as I already mentioned, to de-densify those residential halls. We normally have about 8,500 students living in our residence halls. We plan on having significantly fewer this year. We don't know exactly how many. We've had a number of students inquire about canceling their housing contracts, and we're allowing them to do that because we know we have sufficient number of courses that can be taught remotely off campus. And so we will really work hard. It's going to be about just continuing to educate them about the importance of hygiene, mask wearing, and distancing. But once they're in that dorm room or dorm suite with 6 to 8 people, we treat them, and our infectious disease experts have provided guidance around this year. They're treated as a family under that situation. But once they leave that suite, they will be expected to wear masks. And so that everybody has said, David Weber and Mike Cohen and others that you probably have had speak to your group before have said that the masks that's the key the key protection feature here to this.
Chancellor, we all know, one of the impressive things about University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is that we have people from all over the world who come and study here, and I have a lot of international students and so on. Next question is, will there be any study abroad travel this year? And along those same lines, as a second part, folks who attend our university who would normally be people from other countries who would normally be in residence here on campus at UNC, will they be able to take their courses online from their home country?
Yeah, good question. So let me just say that one of the things as Dean of the College of Arts and Science I worked really hard at was to try to increase study abroad opportunities for students at Carolina. And we actually climbed in the rankings in that regard over the past 5 years. We had just reached about 42% of our students were studying abroad over the past 2 years. And that's up from about 22% just 7 or 8 years ago. So we're proud of that. But obviously this year, the virus is creating a major challenge for us in that regard. And so we are providing opportunities in just a few countries for this fall. We're hoping to be able to provide more opportunities in the spring. But for this fall right now, the only two programs that are still being considered is Hong Kong and South Korea. These are two places that have gotten their situation under control. It's very safe. They've had, in fact, in many ways, I wish that we had followed their lead here in the U.S. with how because they were two of the countries that regions of the world that were hit pretty early, but they got it under control. So we're still looking at those two options for students to travel this fall, and hopefully we'll open more for the spring. And then for those international students who can't get to Carolina, we have a new program called Carolina Away. It'll take up to 1,000 students, and it's going to be an incredible program. We've been talking about trying to create something like this, an all-remote semester for students who want to be here but can't be here. And this just sort of expedited our planning process. It's being led by Steve Farmer and Rudy Colorado Mansfield and others. And but it'll create learning communities, one around global business, another around global health. And there will actually be a featured course that they'll have to take, these students, around COVID-19 research investigations. And so some of we'll have about 18 to 20 courses offered just around COVID, so that our experts can actually, share their knowledge and expertise around the world. So that opportunity will be there.
So, Chancellor, when the university opens and students come back to town, the whole town comes alive. Everything changes overnight. And so the town and the gown are inseparable. What are you doing to coordinate what you're doing with the town and the county and the officials, the local police, all the rest of that, with regard to how to keep this place as safe as you want it to be?
Yeah, so we're, as I said earlier, Mayor Hemiger's been great, Penny Rich and others. We've had conversations with them. We are, as an example, I talked with Mayor Hemiger about 2 weeks ago, and I was very concerned about some of the cases that we were seeing just at Campus Health. We had been doing really well, and then we had suddenly about 14 to 18 cases over a fairly short period of time. And the contact tracing really works, I will tell you, because through that contact tracing, you learn where that virus was picked up and potentially spread. And we were learning that this was happening at some of the places up on Franklin Street where students were beginning to gather. And I shared that concern with the mayor. And she said, well, I have a meeting Tuesday evening, and I'm going to bring this up, and we're going to discuss it. Well, over the course of several days, we found that new ordinance was put in place where they were closing down the restaurants and bars and things by 10 o'clock. And we'll know probably in another week to 10 days if that's working. I suspect that it is. That's just one example of how we're working together in a coordinated fashion. We're also, our police chief and our public safety team here is working closely in a coordinated effort with both Carborough and Chapel Hill's police force, and to try to be sure, how can we enforce the community standards, and how are we going to engage our law enforcement officers to help us, especially when we're trying to really work on building trust between our police force and the community, the students in our case, and staff and faculty, so that they're not, certainly we're not going to be arresting people for not wearing a mask, but we have to find ways that we can utilize the appropriate people to try to convince people of the importance of accepting those community standards and adhering to them. So we're working on that right now.
Yeah,
I think it represents just a huge challenge there, and it's impressive the work that's going into making the university control the pieces that are under your control directly. That's impressive, the systems that have already been put in place. But I think you just highlighted the potential shortcoming. And another example that we wonder about would be fraternities and sororities. We've got the primary goal of fraternities and sororities is to foster social bonding and an active social life. And it would seem that those two would be a potential super spreading kind of source. And our question is, will they be permitted to open and hold regular activities like Rush and so on this fall?
So we have been in regular conversations with the Interfraternity Council and Athletic Council, others talking about the plans for the fall for opening up. And it's going to be a very different fall semester here at Carolina. We've made it very clear that these large gatherings will not happen. They cannot happen. That would be an off-ramp. If we find that the Greek system is not cooperating with us with regard to these community standards, that could be a reason that we just shut everything down again. And we have to be smart about how we're taking on this virus. And I know that there's talk about having potentially some of the fraternities still having a rush, but it would be done remotely, not too different from how we're doing it right here in the absence of these larger social gatherings. Zoom, has worked really well for most of the functions that we need to carry out the work of the university, and I think they're looking at ways to do that. But I will tell you that we are serious about this. I've had 2 conversations just this week regarding Greek life, and working closely with Student Affairs, Jonathan Sauls and Desiree Ricklenberg, our Dean of Students, on this topic. And I want to say that I understand the concerns by the town, by citizens, members of the community about this, because this is about protecting everybody.
Chancellor, you've talked about off ramps. I think most of us would just say that when you say off ramp, that means shut it down. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've been using the word off ramp because we talked about a roadmap. We built this roadmap for the fall 2020, and so we were talking earlier in the spring when we had to pivot. We pivoted to a remote environment. Since we have a roadmap, we're just calling these we're calling them off ramps. Exit 18B might be that we have to shut down a residence hall. Exit 21A might be that we have to go entirely remote for certain classes because the size of the class is too large and it's just not working because there's been a cluster of positive cases. Or it could be the entire shutdown, Jim, that you just mentioned of on-campus operations.
So along those same lines, if we're talking about off ramps, how large a population of patients can UNC Student Health handle? And what are you doing to expand that if need be? And then kind of related to that, is there a point where you would say there are, so maybe ask the question another way, what are all of the off ramps? Would it include a number of patients that were coming off the campus into student health that you would say, okay, that's enough, we've got to shut it down?
That's a metric that we're looking at. We're working closely with UNC Healthcare. Right now, fortunately, they are not at capacity or near capacity, but one of our off-ramps would be that UNC Healthcare that would manage potential patients who are infected was reaching capacity, or that our isolation space or quarantine space, we've now cleared 2 residential halls that will be used for isolation or quarantine space. And if those were at or near capacity, that would be an off-ramp such that we couldn't safely isolate potentially infected students on campus. So yes, we're working closely with UNC Healthcare. I don't have the number of hospital beds that it would take that were filled before we would take an off-ramp, but the UNC Healthcare officials are working to help guide our decision making on this, and if we were reaching that capacity, we would certainly take an off ramp.
If you shut it down, would classes stop, or would they all go online?
Well, if we had to shut down, yes, we would. Those I mentioned earlier, about 50% of our classes right now, we're planning to offer in person, and those would then have to be converted to an all remote learning environment. And the good news is that right now 90% of our courses are set up to be taught remotely, even if they're scheduled to be taught in person right now. And we also have this hybrid model where many faculty will be teaching in person in a classroom while the course is being recorded and taken in what we call synchronous manner remotely by students at the same time, then they could be living in, California or Ohio taking that class because they decided not to come back to be a residential student. So we have a lot of flexibility.
Gavin?
Well, I think it's quite clear. I think you said it well. You said this is going to be a fall that's not like one we've not seen before, and everything's going to be different. We'll pivot a little bit, I think, now, and I know it's a topic that's on the mind of many of our members and most anybody in the area who is a UNC athletics fan. Can you tell us a little bit about the current thoughts on athletics this fall? Will we play sports this fall?
I will tell you, Gavin, I'm increasingly more worried about that. We have a really important call coming up this coming Wednesday with the ACC presidents and chancellors, where we'll be receiving a report from a sports medicine advisory committee for the ACC. And I think we'll have more information at that point. But I think you've already seen the Ivy League has basically shut down all competition for this fall. At least two conferences have the Big Ten, and I think the Pac-12 have already said they'll only play in conference games. And so they're reworking all of their schedules. And so we're working toward trying to find the safest path. As I've said repeatedly, it's the health and safety of our not only our campus community, but it's the community at large. And we want to be sure that if we're going to have an athletic season, we have to think about not only their student athletes, but those who would potentially be attending games, how we would handle that. So we're working tirelessly to try to get to the right place. But I will say that I'm increasingly more concerned about the likelihood of a sports season, or at least starting on time. It could even be that it's a later start because we're still, not seeing a drop in the number of cases here locally.
On the sports front, Chancellor, when we begin to look at the social and the economic impact of football, because it's a huge, it's important in so many ways, has the concept of playing this season in the spring been considered?
I'm sorry, Jim, I want to make sure you broke up for 1 second.
Has the prospect of playing among the considerations, has the possibility of playing in the spring been considered?
Playing football in the spring.
Yes.
Yeah, that's been discussed, and there are a number of other conferences I know that are considering it. I anticipate we'll hear that as a possible option for us, and that would be interesting. And and that there's a lot of assumptions that go with that, which would be that by spring we would be, probably have a vaccine for the virus and better therapeutics, more available therapeutics for those who would contract the virus. So we'll. I'd like to ask you, what do you think of that plan? Do you think spring football sounds like fun?
Well, I think we've adjusted to a lot of things in the past, and it's an outdoor sport, and that's a lovely time to be outdoors. There's a general sense that somehow, some way, people just want to see us play football. And thinking about all that, there is the possibility, and I just say possibility, I do not believe it's a probability that we will have vaccines by the middle of the winter, but heck, you come out of the medical research area. When you're talking to your epidemiologists, do you think we'll have a vaccine during this school year?
I'll tell you, we're much closer today than we were just 5 months ago. And that's the other thing when people say, why, you're really trying to ramp up some of the campus operations and try to get back to some sense of normalcy. And why is that? And, I was just talking to a group yesterday about this, and I said, well, we know so much more about this virus today than we did just 4 or 5 months ago, and proud to say that a lot of that's because of our incredible infectious disease and public health experts here at Carolina. We have a clinical trial that's being conducted here right now. I think there's about 3 or 4 clinical trials around the country right now for the early stage of the vaccine, and one of those is being done right here. by our experts, Mike Cohen and his team, and Ralph Barrick is working on remdesivir, the antiviral medication, and making great progress on both those fronts. So I think, and again, I'm not an expert on this, although I have been hanging out with them for the past several months. I feel like I can speak certainly much more articulate than I could just a few months ago. I think it's likely we'll have be in a much better place with it by March, April, but I'm not sure about December, January, which is probably going to dictate how we move forward for the spring semester, but we're getting closer.
Within the context of athletics, and I guess beyond, for the monetary, the financial implications of this for everything have been huge. Let's start specifically with athletics. If there's not a football season, what are the budgetary issues that come out of all of this? What does that do to revenue, to costs, and any concerns about threats to the budgets?
It's significant. I mean, football is the big revenue generator, and part of the revenue comes from ticket sales, concessions, just and it drives the economic engine up in town, as you well know, and then about half of it, that revenue comes from TV revenue, and so that's why a lot of conferences are considering, well, even if we could play safely for those student athletes, but play in the absence of fans, the TV revenue would bring in close to half of what they would otherwise be bringing in. And so that's all on the table for consideration, but it's huge. And as you well know, it's those larger, revenue generators, football, men's basketball, that also help support our other Olympic teams, and so we're working hard to try to make sure that they can stay supported, and so it's very concerning right now.
In a moment, we're going to turn to questions from that are coming from out in the field, and a reminder that if you have a question, just go to the chat room and look for questions, and then ask your question. I want to follow up on that. From you, there are two buckets of money, as I understand it. You've got the athletic department, and then you've got the campus at large. If you are a state-supported university, what are the impacts on the campus itself? Do you collect you will collect the same approximate revenue, I guess, because the student body that is enrolled is about the same size, I think, as the normal student body. What are the budgetary implications for you outside athletics on the campus itself?
Sure, great question, Jim. So we are, first of all, I think you will know that very fortunate in North Carolina. We are supported by the General Assembly and the taxpayer dollars better than just about any other state. There might be 3 or 4 other states that support higher education at a higher rate than what we're supported at here in North Carolina. So we're very fortunate. There are different buckets of pots of money, if you will. There's our obviously tuition. So that's a big number in the neighborhood of probably $450 million, $500 million a year. There's state appropriation, which comes, that's probably another $530 to $550 million. There's obviously research expenditures. We're a $1 billion a year research enterprise, and that is another big part of our budget. We have a great, our UNC healthcare system, so there's revenue that's generated there, and every one of those, maybe with the exception of our research enterprise, stands to take a hit with this pandemic. And we don't, fortunately for this year, what we've heard is we're not going to, for this academic year, likely going to take hopefully too big of a budget cut from state appropriation, and hopefully not with tuition, because of we're trying our best to try to provide that opportunity for our students, as many as we can, whether that's remote learning or some combination of remote and in-person. But what we do know is that there are some students, we've polled students, and some have said, well, if it's going to be an entirely remote learning environment, then I'm going to take a gap year. or I'm going to take just take a year off or enroll somewhere else. And so we've looked at that. And for every 10 to 15%, about every 10% of students who choose not to enroll, it could be upwards of $50 million of tuition revenue. So we're looking at that closely. We want to, again, provide flexibility for students so that they can come back and learn in whatever format that they feel safest. But that revenue is it's important, but we're not going to put that above the health and safety of our students. Those that would choose to not live in a residence hall or dining halls, there's revenue, there's issues there that can arise. So we're looking at all of this closely and working closely with the UNC system and the Board of Governors on this to be sure that that we can remain financially healthy, but more important than that, that our campus community remains physically and mentally healthy. Let me just add that, because a lot of people are concerned about, the health risks of bringing people back to campus. I would add that there are a lot of health risks with the isolation of an entirely remote environment, teleworking, just studying entirely remotely from home. A lot of challenges. There's a lot of mental health issues with college-age students these days, and we've heard from a lot of parents and students that isolation is taking a toll on some of the mental health issues of college students. So there's a lot of competing factors as we're making these decisions moving forward. Long answer to your good question, Jim.
Well, thank you. I think it would be excellent now if we field some questions from our guests. So Jim, will you take us through those questions?
Well, and there are lots of them. Dr. Brian Stabler starts by asking you, Chancellor, to compare the quality of the learning experience online with the quality of the learning experience in the classroom.
Sure. So let me just say that our faculty did an incredible job this past spring pivoting from an entirely in-person teaching environment to an entirely remote teaching environment in about 10 days. We made that decision around March 12th, and we opened campus back up remote only, opened up campus, meaning we reopened the classroom through Zoom on the 23rd of March. So we, this past spring, I think higher education in general got a pass. I'll just say that. I've talked to many other university chancellors and presidents, because in most cases, 85% of those faculty had never really taught remotely before. Having done it now for half of a semester, and many of our faculty have taken advantage of trying to improve that their remote teaching over the summer. There have been a lot of workshops offered and things of that nature through our Center for Faculty Excellence. It's only going to get better. So, the students are probably the better ones to ask that question to, or to answer that question. But our students responded very favorably toward the work that our faculty did. But for some classes, science labs, it's just very difficult to do remotely. And so they're working hard to try to improve that experience online. But we know that our students learn and grow best when they're here on campus in this in-person environment, where they have the benefit of their faculty and graduate students and each other right by their side. But we have to do what's safest and provide the flexibility for everyone.
I'm thinking about all these demonstrations, and you may remember, Chancellor, when Russ Hardin was speaking about Paul Hardin when he was the chancellor here. He said he started his first year with Jesse Helms telling him that that the university was a hotbed of communism, and that he ended his term with Jesse Jackson complaining about the issues with the racial issues. And I'm thinking you've got to get used to this life. So this week, Earl Cheston has just asked how you deal with the question this week about whether we can say Tar Heels.
Well, I'm Kevin Guskiewicz, and I'm proud to be a Tar Heel. So I'll just answer it that way.
Okay.
Let me just say, Jim, that this isn't the first time that this question has surfaced. But I do think that it's been looked at, but has never really risen to the level that get serious consideration for the removal of that name. We are the Tar Heel State. Just had an early conversation with Jim Lalutis about this today, and Jim certainly, as one of our incredible historians here, North Carolinian, and a scholar of history of North Carolina. I think that there are many different interpretations of the Tar Heel name, and so I don't see it gaining much traction as I stand here today. I could be wrong, but that's where I am today on it.
Steve Fromby wants to know if any thought has been given to making the various behaviors that threaten to spread COVID-19 an honor code violation.
Probably not. We have talked extensively with student affairs, student government, and members that oversee that. It just becomes a challenge given the time that it takes for these cases to be worked through the system. So probably not. I think it's going to be more of just everybody stepping up and emphasizing the importance of it, and almost embarrassing people into it if they're not wearing a mask or practicing the proper hygiene and social distancing that's going to be expected. It's an expectation, and I'm proud of our students here, and I think that many people have gone into this with the assumption that they just won't follow the community standards once they're back. And I'm going to give our students the benefit of the doubt because I've been a faculty member here for 25 years. I think they're willing. I think they are going to accept the responsibility of stepping up to help kind of build this new community standard for health here locally. So that's my hope, my goal.
We have lots of questions about testing, and I think it may boil down to Penny Rich just wants to know generally what's the program for testing students? How often will they be tested? And David Bedour has asked if it's feasible to test students either before as they arrive on campus or periodically during the fall. And then he also asked if it's not feasible to test everybody. Is the issue one of cost, that is paying for the tests, or is it the limited availability of the tests?
Well, it's actually, and again, we have had lengthy conversations with our infectious disease and public health experts on this topic. And they, like the CDC, if you go to the CDC's guidelines on returning students to college campuses in bold lettering, they clearly state that they do not recommend wide-scale baseline re-entry testing. And one of the reasons is that it can produce a false sense of security because there is that period between, you could test negative on Tuesday and be positive on Thursday or Friday. There's the incubation period that exists there creates some challenges, and it also has to do with the supply chain. Right now, there is not the supply that would be needed to baseline test everyone. We've also looked at options where students might test before they come back and prove that they've tested negative. But as I've just said, they could become positive, immediately after that. We think we have a good testing program in place that's going to test symptomatic patients, symptomatic students, staff, faculty, that our infectious disease public health experts think will be the best way to contain the virus if a group is infected, and the contact tracing works. We know that. We've seen it work here on campus already. So those are the main reasons. It's the supply chain has me a little worried right now because we were being told 3-4 weeks ago that we'd be able to test probably upwards of 3,000 people a day here locally. And because they've been diverting a lot of the supplies for testing to California, Arizona, Texas, Florida, that supply chain has become not scarce, but certainly not what we thought it would be. So we're
So we have
continuing to monitor it.
So we have a lot of questions here about what happens when a student tests positive, what kicks in. Are all the students in that person's living group quarantined, everyone in the same class? So if a student is test positive, what does that trigger?
It immediately puts them into isolation, and the contact tracing is put into effect. And so I don't have all the specifics of it. We have a incredible team that's doing this, but those individuals that meet the criteria for having had a contact which could have allowed them to contract the virus from that individual, they are tested, put into the program, tested, and it picks up those who are obviously positive, and then they themselves are isolated or quarantined. So as I said, it's been working so far on our campus, with our research operations having ramped up beginning in early June here on campus, and with our student athlete testing program as well.
We've had a handful of questions about the Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools approach to this, and whether you'd given any thought to doing the same thing. Rob Maitland and Brian Swafford, I think, among some others, have asked that if the Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools, they've gone to a system of virtual classrooms for the first, I think it's 6 weeks, or maybe first 9 weeks of the school
9 weeks.
9 weeks of the school year. Was UNC, did you participate? Were you consulted? Was there any consultation between systems about that?
No, we weren't involved in that decision making. We've been working closely with Orange County Health Department, with the governor's office, and working with both local and state health officials on this. And I know that the school superintendents were doing the same. And so we certainly, this is a factor we're going to have to put in place here as we look at how we would bring faculty, staff back to campus, and graduate students who may have children in the Chapel Hill or surrounding school districts. That's certainly going to create some additional challenges with parents of children needing to likely be at home working with their children with homeschooling. So we have meetings still yet to come today on this topic, and as I said, this is not easy. And there's no playbook for it, but we're going to get to a place where we provide as much flexibility for our employees and for our students, so that we can hopefully get through this. I'm just hopeful that by this time next year, we're planning for a normal fall semester at Carolina.
So, Chancellor, if the president is supposed to have to worry about Congress every day, every chancellor has to worry about the faculty. And so the faculty, they're adults. Lots of those faculty people fall into the demography of those who would worry the most about COVID-19. How comfortable do you feel your faculty as a group is about the plan that you're on?
Sure. I think it's across the board, Jim. I have I heard from a faculty member 2 weeks ago. He said, "I've been at this a long time," and he jokingly, I think, said, "I'd rather die of COVID-19 standing in front of my classroom teaching in person than die at home trying to figure out how to teach remotely when I know that I'm not very good at it." And that's obviously an extreme, and I think he was, I hope, partially joking. But there's a lot of faculty that are concerned about it, and from the very beginning, we have worked hard to try to respect the feelings of those. I mean, some of faculty fall into the category where we want them teaching remotely because they either fall into an age category where they're at risk, or they may have some pre-existing condition. They may be caring for a parent that is immunosuppressed or something. And so we want them to work remotely this fall. And there are others that they're going to fight if we were to have to turn entirely remote, they're going to push back because they think they do their best work right here on campus, and they want to be here. So we're trying to provide the options to meet all the the varying needs. But there certainly are a lot of concerned faculty.
We have a question from the community. Leon Scroggins says, "Hi, this is Leon Scroggins, class of '05. He says, "I played football with Brian Chacos." So
Yes.
there's a shout out for Brian. He says, "I love the university. I live and work close by. Speaking for myself, I'm worried about the risk of bringing students from all over back to the campus. I do not expect they will follow safety recommendations. I already see lots of young people gathering on campus without distance or masks already. You mentioned trying to beat the second wave, but my understanding is that the first wave is ongoing. I understand there are competing interests, but I really do worry about our sacrificing safety."
Well, we have said from the very beginning that the health and safety of the campus community was the first and foremost as we're planning. And so we are going to have a significantly reduced population of students on our campus. As I said, we're a new word. I mean, the word de-densify I had never used in my life up until about 8 weeks ago. And we've been working to figure out how we de-densify the campus. I mean, we're talking about just the way we move students in and out of buildings. We're going to have tents. We're preparing to start putting tents up on campus where we're going to de-densify the dining halls, and outdoor space is safer than indoor space. So we're going to probably be teaching some classes in these tents. And so we're doing everything we can to take those individuals who feel they can come back here. And again, I want to go back to something I said earlier. There are some students here at Carolina who they need to be here on campus. They don't have the ability, because of their home situation, to study remotely. We still had 850 students. What most people don't know, even in the spring, that second half of the spring semester, from about March the 12th through May 10th, we still had 850 students living in our residential halls, probably more than most other universities. And that's because these were either international students, students with hardships. They don't have internet service where they live. And so we have experience with this, and we again had all the proper measures in place back then, and we know a lot more about it now than we did then to put the protections in place. Now we are talking about bringing a lot more back than 850 to live in residential halls right now as we sit here today. That could change over the next few days, few weeks. And so, as I've said from the beginning, we understand there are concerns. We're taking it seriously, and we may be taking an off-ramp at some point.
So we're down to the lightning round, but I've just got I think Matthew Arnold's asked a really good a question that I'm going to elaborate on for just a moment. When you're making decisions like this, you want to be America's, maybe the world's leading public university. That suggests being out front, innovating, doing things for the first time or better than anybody else. And at the same time, you're doing best practices. And Matt said, do you see any way, an opportunity for Carolina to stand out, to somehow demonstrate leadership at doing something bigger, better, more clever, more creative, more enlightened than anybody else?
Yeah, good question, Matt. I'll just say that, again, several weeks ago, I remember being on a Zoom call like this with a group, and I said, we are in a race to be right, not a race to be first. And I meant that. And we, unlike most other leading global public research universities, we're surrounded by these infectious disease and public health experts that are helping to guide the CDC and the World Health Organization and others. And they have told us as early as recently as this morning on our 8:30 to 9:30 call, I asked, should we be taking an off-ramp right now today? And, we walked through that and talked through this. And again, many of them feel that this is the safest place for some of those students to be. We talked a lot about the de-densification, how we do that, and we're working on that. And so, no, I'm not trying to put Carolina out there to be leading in a cavalier way. We are leading in an informed way with some of the best people in the world guiding our decision making. And again, those decisions may be changing here over the next week, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, but we're gonna get it right.
Chancellor, we have about 2 minutes, and because you live here, your constituency is the state of North Carolina. Your boundary is the state boundary, but yet you're a neighbor. We know you. Your life, I would like to ask you how you cope with this personally, because I was talking to Cecilia Moore, university historian, who said we have probably not had a chancellor, who certainly not, or university CEO, who in his first year on the job is facing the kinds of challenges that you have. And I'm thinking about your life before this and your life now. You earned international acclaim for your groundbreaking work in concussion research. Your mild temperament has generally made you a popular figure, and you have conciliatory temperament at a time that you're facing irreconcilable issues. You've got $3.5 billion budget, 13,000 employees, 29,000 students, a community that depends on you. The students all want an education. They all want to be safe. You've got racial issues that always roil campuses. We've got the name-changing issue. And whatever you do about football is going to be controversial. And so when you look at all of those conflicting pressures, where there are these seemingly irreconcilable forces that you have to know is going to result in a very large number of stakeholders being critical of you and unhappy with how you do this at the same time that you're trying to form a consensus. How do you process all that?
Sure. You see the gray hair, Jim? I didn't have all that a year ago. No. Let me also just add that I'm the father of 2 students here at Carolina, and so I've been told that I may be the first since Chancellor Sitterson, I think, and that's been quite a few. I think he was here the year I was born. But I think about this through different lenses. I think I have the benefit of viewing these issues through different lenses and bring something unique to the job. I love this job. I love this great university. I've been here 25 years, and I knew that it wasn't going to be an easy job, and you have to have thick skin. You have to recognize that you're not going to make everyone happy. I wrote a piece, a blog about a year and a half ago, right as I was finishing up as dean of the college and about to step into my role as interim chancellor. And it was called The Art and Science of Leadership. And I talked about the way I make decisions as a dean or a chancellor now, being very similar to the way in which I conduct my research that you mentioned as a neuroscientist. And it's very hypothesis driven. It's putting a methodology in place to answer an important question, and you take you run you go through that process in a very methodical approach. You gather as much evidence and data as you can, and then you have to make a decision. You have to know when you think you have enough information to make that decision, and go at it knowing that you're A, not going to make everybody happy, and B, that there's risk in it potentially being the wrong decision. But I think when you sit around and you wait too long, there's a lot of risk in that as well, and you have to be decisive. And so again, I love the job, but there are a lot of constituencies, as you've said. I'm proud of the leadership team that we have here at Carolina, and I'm proud of the roadmap that we have for this fall. And it very well may be changing, but we've built it in such a way that we're taking the best available data at this point in time and trying to create the most opportunities so that we can be that leading global public research university that we aspire to be, but to be doing it in a safe way. Again, I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. I have to jump into another meeting.
Yes. Well, Chancellor, this concludes the time we have together today, and we have certainly learned a lot. On behalf of the club and our guests from the community, thank you for giving us this time, and go Heels. And we just thank everyone for attending today and wish everyone a good and a safe and happy week. Thank you.
Great job, guys. Great job.
Thank you.